Lodge, which was then being held in the house of Sister Vinodini Goenkaji, the former international president Radhaji, very kindly offered my wife and me an opportunity to live and work in Adyar. Many speakers have already spoken at this conference, and I am sure that they would have spoken about the theosophical views on suffering contained in the Mahatma letters, in Madame Blavatsky's book, The Key to Theosophy, and Dr. Besant's book, Meaning and Use of Pain. These are classics for theosophists. In any case, these are covered in an article on suffering available on the website of Theosophy Wiki, which you can look up. By the way, one of our former members, Sister Shailabala Mahapatra, has written a wonderful little book titled Amme Dukkha Pau Kahinki in Odia. The title means Why We Suffer. This little book deserves to be translated in other Indian languages to reach a wider audience. At least the Assam, Bengal, and Bihar federations can perhaps arrange for its translation into Assamese, Bengali, and Hindi to start with. As the time is short, I am not going to repeat the points made in these books, but say something about suffering from my own experience and also something that I have gleaned from various spiritual teachings I have come across. There was a time in my life of acute suffering due to a personal loss caused by a death in the family. The suffering was almost unbearable. I must say, despite all the theosophical teaching, that time, a friend who has a very deep understanding of theosophical teachings shared with me a story about a little bird. This is how the story goes. There was a little bird that lived in a desert area. It was very sick. It had lost its feathers, so it could not fly. It had nothing to eat and drink because there were no trees and water reservoirs around. And there was also no tree where it could take shelter. One day, a dove, what do we call a dove? Safed kabutar, a white pigeon, was passing by. So the sick, unhappy bird stopped the dove and inquired, "Where are you going?" The dove replied, "I am going to heaven." So the sick bird became very hopeful and said, "Please find out for me when my suffering will come to an end." The dove said, "Sure, I will." And he bid goodbye to the sick bird. The dove reached heaven and shared the message of the sick bird with the angel in charge at the entrance gate to the heaven. The angel said, for the next 7 years of its life, the bird has to suffer like this. There is no happiness till then for the bird. The dove said, when the sick bird hears this, he will get thoroughly disheartened. Would you suggest any solution for this? The angel replied, tell him to recite this verse. And this was the verse. Thank you, God, for everything. The dove, on meeting the sick bird again on its return journey, delivered the message of the angel to it. After 7 days, the dove was again passing by, and he saw that bird was very happy. Feathers had grown on its body. A small plant had grown in the desert area to provide it food and shelter, and a small pond of water had also come up there, and the bird was singing and dancing cheerfully. The dove was astonished. The angel had said there would be no happiness for the bird for the next 7 years. What he saw was contrary to what the angel had said. With this puzzle in his mind, the dove went to visit the angel at heaven's gate. The dove put forth his query to the angel. The angel replied, yes, it is true. There was no happiness for the bird for 7 years. But because the bird was reciting the verse, thank you, God, for everything, in every situation, its life had changed. When the bird fell down on the hot sand, it said, thank you, God, for everything. When it could not fly, it said, thank you, God, for everything. When it was thirsty and there was no water around, it said, thank you, God, for everything. Whatever the situation, the bird kept on repeating, thank you, God, for everything. And therefore, the 7 years got dissolved in 7 days. When I heard this story, I felt a tremendous change in my way of feeling, thinking, accepting, and viewing life. I adopted this mantra in my life. Whatever the situation I faced, I started reciting this mantra. Thank you, God, for everything. It helped me to shift my view from what I did not have to what I have in my life. For example, if my head pains, I thank God that the rest of my body is completely fine and healthy. And then I notice that the headache does not bother me at all. In the same manner, I started using this mantra in my relationships, whether family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, finances, social life, work, and everything with which I can relate. This simple mantra really had a deep impact on my life. I started feeling how blessed I am, how happy I am, how good life is. The purpose of sharing this message with all of you is to make us aware of how powerful the attitude of gratitude is. It can reshape our lives. Counting our blessings can lead us from suffering to happiness. In many spiritual traditions, one is told about the benefits of total surrender to what is. The names of whom to surrender do vary. Ishvara, Allah, Christ, Buddha, Jehovah, and one life in theosophical parlance. The Yoga Sutra of Patanjali talks of Ishvara Pranidhana. The Bhagavad Gita says, Manmana Mad Bhakta Bhava Mamekam Saranam Braja. Shankaracharya chides us in Vajagovindam, why you worry about family, wealth, etc., saying, King Tava Nasti Niyanta, isn't there someone who looks after everything? Others say, Inshallah, by his will everything happens. Yet others say, thy will be done. The challenge before us is to apply this attitude of gratitude and attitude of total surrender in our daily lives so that we are uplifted from a world of suffering to a new life of happiness and contentment. The same advice is given to spiritual aspirants by Patanjali again to practice santosha or contentment, and by Shankaracharya to practice titiksha or endurance. In a very expressive and defining words, the great Acharya says, endure all suffering without retaliating and without worrying over it or crying over it. This is how it goes in Sanskrit. Sahanang sarva dukkhanam apratikara purvakam chinta vilaparahitam satitiksha nigadyate. Attitude of gratitude and attitude of total surrender help us to practice santosha and titiksha instead of feeling miserable about the circumstances we find ourselves in and the people we find ourselves with. We always think that the circumstances we are in should improve. we ask the question, why this is happening to me and not to others? Similarly, if we are having people around us whom we don't like for any reason, then we complain, why are we with such people? So practice of santosh and titiksha actually would make us accept the circumstances we find ourselves in and the people that we find ourselves with. So that is what we have because of our karma in the past have deserved. And we must be tolerant about the circumstances and the people with us. The greatest scientist India produced, don't be surprised, was Lord Buddha, who looked deeply within himself and discovered, as any other scientist does, the noble truths. He said, suffering is inevitable in life. Many times in our schools, they teach life is full of sorrow. That sounds pretty pessimistic. When I was visiting Norway, I was talking to the person who was heading the theosophical organization there, and he said they are taught it in a different way. The Buddha's same teaching of Buddha, it is said that suffering is inevitable in life. If we are born, we have a life, so suffering is inevitable. This doesn't sound so pessimistic. And what else Buddha said? That desire is the cause of all suffering. The theosophical view is that when we forget oneness of life, as Brother Pradeep was also trying to explain, when we forget oneness of life and believe ourselves to be separate from others, it gives rise to selfish desire for various material things for ourselves. When you think we are separate, then we want something for ourselves, which is material things as well as desire for fame and power, etc. All these wars and battles and fights is all for power and also fame and also material gains. These desires, they lead to consequent suffering. In the process, we also act against others and against nature and its law of harmony. In our Puranas, it is expressed, the same concept is expressed as papaya parapidanam. Causing harm to others is sinful. The share of the fruits of such disharmonious action or parapidana or causing harm to others. So these actions, these disharmonious actions, this causing harm to others would have its consequences, the fruits. And the share of these fruits will accrue to whom? To ourselves only, isn't it? And how will it accrue to us? In the form of suffering only. The share is also in our languages called bhag. In Sanskrit, bhagam. The share or bhag, as said in our languages, is inescapable. The bhag or share of the fruits of the action has to come to us. And that is what comes to us surely and certainly as our bhagya or fate. Because this word bhagya comes from bhag only. The word bhagya is derived from the word bhag or share of the fruits of our own action. Then should we not accept our bhag or due share of suffering gladly? Because we are the cause of that, which arise from our own disharmonious action in our present life or in our past lives. The spiritual teaching is suffering is not only inevitable, but also necessary to educate us and to teach us, to turn us to the path of love, humility, and compassion, to see the manifestation of one life in all. Without suffering, we will not be led to a life of love, humility, and compassion. We'll be very egoistic. We will not see the manifestation of one life in all, and nor we will lead a life of service and sacrifice. Brother Pradeep was explaining the 5 yajnas, the sacrifices. I was just wondering that time, he was saying that we should give some food to the animals, make some sacrifice for them. I would think, forget about sacrificing for them. Let us stop sacrificing the animals. We need our chicken curries and mutton soup on our table, for which we are not giving anything to these animals, but we are sacrificing them, killing them to fill our belly. So to see the one life in all is to lead a life of service and sacrifice. Only when we can see that, then only we can render a life, we can have a lead a life of service and sacrifice. Isn't it what Dr. Besant said? A theosophic life is a life of service and sacrifice. Another spiritual teaching says suffering is part of our training program for becoming wise. Yet another teaching says suffering is necessary. But till when? Until you realize it is unnecessary. When you are realized the oneness of life in all, when you are no longer selfish, you are no longer having desire to aggrandize everything for yourself and your kith and kin, then slowly at that moment you realize that suffering is no longer necessary. But till then, yes, it is necessary. Let me end my talk with another story. This comes from the tradition of Ramana Maharshi. A devotee one asked Ramana Maharshi, why do we need to meditate? I say it is my mind. Then should it not listen to me and meditate by itself when I tell it's true? If I tell my mind that you go and now meditate, should it not? Why does it keep running outside all the time? Ramana Maharshi kept silent at that time. Very significant. He didn't reply to this question immediately. At about the same time, a squirrel had given birth in the ashram, and unfortunately, a few days later, the mother squirrel got eaten by a cat. Ramana Maharshi took the job of taking care of the baby squirrels. He kept them inside a cage, and that cage was kept in the meditation hall. After a few days, when everyone was sitting in the meditation hall with Ramana Maharshi there, the same cat came inside. It so happened that the baby squirrels at that point rushed out of the cage. So Ramana Maharshi got up hurriedly, caught all the baby squirrels one by one, and put them back in the cage and locked the door firmly shut. He then turned to the same devotee who had earlier asked the question about meditation. And the Maharshi calmly said, these poor little squirrels do not have the maturity to know the dangers of the outside world, that if they go out, the cat will make a meal of them. When they get that maturity, they will go and hide inside by themselves. Until they get the maturity, we have to keep putting them inside. Then Ramana Maharshi explained, it is the same thing with our mind. Our mind does not know that if it goes to the outside world in pursuit of all kinds of desires and sense objects, there will be nothing but suffering. It keeps running out in ignorance. When it gets the maturity, it will go inside by itself. Until then, it is our job to put it inside with effort, which we do in meditation. That is a nice answer to the question of the devotee. This anecdote about the little squirrel shows us the connection between mind, meditation, and a way to end suffering. And finally, let me leave you with the questions that all of us must ask ourselves. Who am I? And who suffers? Am I the body and mind that suffers? Or am I the eternal that has no birth, no death, and no suffering? The key to this question does not lie in a theoretical understanding, but in gaining the experiential insight into what is true and eternal by mindfully living in the present without brooding over the suffering of the past or worrying about the future. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.